So Scott Kubie is an independent user experience consultant, author, designer, and professional speaker. He most recently served as lead content strategist at Brain Traffic, helping organizations of all kinds deal with big, messy website problems. Thank goodness someone is doing that. You can't have enough people doing that. Scott's led over 80 talks and workshops for international audiences, as well as dozens of on-site training events for clients, including Harvard, the Getty, and the IRS. Again, a group of people who sorely need it. Scott is the author of Writing for Designers, a brief book about how to get the writing done on web and digital projects. Scott, we are thrilled to welcome you to the summit.
Thank you, Katherine. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. This is, it's heartwarming that events like this happen at all, that any of you care. It's nice. I mean, I care about the big messy website problems. Gosh, we got to have people caring about plain language and clear communication. It's a super important thing. So I'm going to jump right in. Let me see. I'll get my screen share going here. I was kind of distracting myself with guitar conversation. All right, share keynote, hit play. Let's see, I'm gonna move one more thing for myself so I can see the chat, if it will allow me to find my cursor. Maybe not. Okay. Anyway, this is, yes, I'm Scott Kubie. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Happy to be with you all today. This talk is about creating and training writers. That's something that I've done a lot. Sometimes, and I imagine many of you have too, sometimes we're doing it very explicitly and intentionally, as in we are hosting a training for writers who are doing onboarding for it. I imagine for a lot of folks, it happens kind of informally as we are coaching our peers, doing crits and feedback sessions with folks, and so on. So this is something that I've been mired in for a while. I've been the word person on all kinds of projects and teams. I've worked in higher ed. I've worked on nonprofit, certainly business, industry, Fortune 500 companies, and so on. And I had a whole kind of previous life in the arts and media, nonprofits, and so on. So I've helped just about every kind of folk that you can think of get more comfortable with writing. So that is what I'm going to be talking about today. I find that a really good starting point, why I talk about this at all, this is a thing that you know, that I know. It is a sometimes uncomfortable truth, depending on how many writers we have access to. But all this stuff on the web and our apps and services and forms that you all work on and help with, if there's words, someone wrote them. If there's words, someone wrote them. Someone has to do the writing. And in my experience, I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever met a team that would say, you know what, we actually have all the writers we need and we're doing great. There's plenty of writers, no problems. No, we don't have enough writers. We are having to recruit, cajole, push, train, get people involved in it. So my philosophy is if someone has to do the writing, then we should do whatever we can to help those people get more comfortable with the writing. And one of the things that is really sort of the theme for me in all of my talks and training and workshops in this is that writing is a lot more than writing. It's so wonderful to see disciplines and schools of thought like content design, UX writing, smart brevity. You know, there's a lot of different schools of thought on like how we do the writing, and that's where my interest tends to lie. I'll talk more about how in a bit. But a good starting point if you're going to be trying to get people onboarded, get them more comfortable with writing, is to remember that in most cases, it's not merely typing words into a word processing program or a CMS. Increasingly, there's a lot of stuff that looks like, feels like, maybe in fact just is user-centered design and user experience design that happens as part of our writing processes. So that is really, if you take nothing else away from this talk, if the lunch order comes and you fall off your Zoom, just remember this. If you're going to be training people on writing, think about all the stuff that happens around and related to writing, because a lot of times that's the important stuff that's kind of missing for folks. as I said, I've been doing this for a while. I just went back through my logs and putting this talk together. It's been 12 years. 12 is a great number for a presentation like this. I wanted to share 12 tips from 12 years of teaching writing. And the idea, I'll just tell you directly, the idea behind this talk is not, here is the method, do it this way. Use all 12 of these tips, apply them in order. This is more me talking to you as peers and other smart people that are probably also doing this work, that have a lot of experience with writing. A lot of you are probably much better with grammar and editing and stuff than I am. That's not really my expertise. I have focused on the training part of it, which is how do you get people comfortable with writing? What do you actually need to do to turn someone from, oh, I'm not a writer, into, yeah, I'll take a run at that. I think I might be able to write that for you. So these are things that you, even if you're an experienced writing trainer, that maybe you just haven't thought of or haven't reflected on recently, and I thought it might be good for us to dig into it a little bit. So tip number one, it's almost Halloween. Writing is scary. It is, school really screws people up on writing. Writing is a personal thing. Even if you're writing about, you know, recycling dates and times for the county, if you're writing about, you know, some new resolution that's passed, if you are writing about changes in insurance policies, writing, it comes from a vulnerable place for people because it involves a lot of skills that maybe they've gotten a lot of feedback, welcome and unwelcome, in their lives. And maybe, probably for a lot of folks, they had some sort of not great experience with writing, especially if there's someone who says, oh, I'm not a writer, or I'm not comfortable with writing, or I'm not one of those creative types. A lot of times what I've learned is that is kind of self-defense. People are a little intimidated by writing, especially if they've had to spend a lot of time with maybe some kind of snooty, pedantic grammar folks who are not helping people feel more comfortable with writing. They're making them feel afraid of your rules and guidelines and red pen. So I try and approach any training, any lesson, books that I put together with this in mind, that this is a vulnerable place for people. And I like to acknowledge that explicitly, verbally. I like to tell people, hey, I get it. Like, it's like writing sucks for everyone, especially writers. I'm paraphrasing someone now that I can't think of, but like it's a hard thing, and I think it's important to keep that in mind and to think about that in your processes as well. How are people going to be getting feedback on their writing? Who is it going to go in front of? These are the kinds of questions that people have when they're approaching it. So please do remember that writing is scary. You might not be able to remember how hard you've worked to get as good at it as you are. Lesson 2, how precedes what? How precedes what? When I go into organizations that know they need some help with writing, maybe they feel like they've got subject matter experts that need to do writing and they're not great at it. They're frustrated that the marketing team like writes in too marketing-y of a way. What I find tends to be the case is that they have, they'll try and give people lots of guidance on what to write, right? This is what our voice and tone guidelines, this is what a style guide is. It's sort of like the particular mechanics, like we prefer this word, but not this word. Here are the subjects here and so on. But a lot of times people just don't know the actual literal process of writing. One of the earliest experiences I had of recognizing this, I worked at a startup company. My friend Neil was the lead engineer there, is one of the co-founders, super smart guy, one of the smartest people I know. We put a very standard startup content marketing plan together for our blog. We were just, everyone's going to write about their area of expertise, one post a month, just to share things. So we had a planning meeting, put the editorial calendar together, talked a bit about voice and tone, and then everyone was off to their corners. And he came back around to me and he said, hey, how do you write a blog post? And I was very confused by this question because he set up the CMS. Right, like he was our engineer. He built it. I was like, well, what do you mean? How do you write a blog post? Like, did you lose your login? Like, what are you talking about here? He's like, no. Like, what do I do? Like, what's the first thing that I should do? And I thought about it for a while. And I'm like, oh, you're asking about the mechanics, which I guess I didn't really talk about. I mean, we went through. I put a little guide together for him. Stuff that to you and me probably seems very common, which is like choose one main point to write about, put that at the top of your page so you can remember what you're writing about, create an outline, maybe show the outline to someone else, write a paragraph for each of the points on your outline, stitch it together, so on and so forth. And that was the guidance that he needed. It was that how to approach writing. I do a lot of talking about how because because no one else is. To a certain extent, there's so much guidance on style and not as much focus on the mechanics. If you ask someone to just write something for you, if they're used to sending memos and business emails and text messages all day long, their writing process is usually to like create a new thing, right? File new document, compose new email, and then they just start typing. And when they've finished their thought, they hit send. That works great for emails. Inner office emails. I wish people would go back and edit the subject lines more carefully. And that's how most of us send those kinds, do that kind of writing. And so if someone is tasked with something larger, now they're being asked to contribute to the company blog. Maybe they are asked to put out a statement on something. You can talk style all day long, but process-wise, what they're going to do is go to Word, start a new document, not do any outlining, not do any thinking, not do any of the good content design, user-centered stuff for articulating audiences and so on. They're just going to try and write it like pitch perfect, word perfect from the get-go. That doesn't work. Doesn't work very well. It's how we end up with super bloated copy. It's how the points that we want to make end up at the bottoms of paragraphs instead of the top. It's how the conclusions aren't summarized at the beginning because we haven't given people a structure for doing that. So what do we do instead? Instead of just telling people, you know, here's our style guidelines, good luck. I find that it is helpful to teach some sort of framework to folks for writing, like just some basic steps. This is the one that I use. I encourage you to steal it. It's not particularly original, but it is very useful. So in my workshops, onboarding sessions, and so on, I walk people through this framework and talk about 4 steps, 4 phases of writing, and then I'll share with them different tools that they can use in these steps. And those are prepare, so getting ready to write, all the thinking and goal setting and so on. Compose, so compose is the phase that most people think of as the writing. That's where the words go into the document or the draft. Edit, this seems silly to you and me. It's not. It's important to bring up with people. Folks who aren't used to writing don't think about editing as a separate phase. They try and do it all at once, or they get stuck writing and rewriting the headlines in the first paragraph. I like to encourage people to wear different hats to separate their composition and editing phases. And then something that I find is really important. So these 3. Go through them again. Prepare, compose, edit. This is what you'll find in a lot of books on writing, because this is like what works if you are writing a mystery novel. Is you're going to get it ready, you're going to organize your plot, and make some notes on characters, you're going to write a draft, maybe write another draft, you do a whole bunch of editing rounds, and then it goes away, and then at some point it becomes a book. That's your job. In digital, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen to things after we write them. It might be going through quality assurance testing, legal reviews. We might need to be doing, you know, sometimes it's like adding links and getting something integrated and metadata, getting it integrated into our systems. There might be other steps and processes. It's really helpful to teach people what's going to happen to their writing when they finish a draft. That's important for a few reasons. Knowing what's going to happen beginning to end can make that first phase, prepare, go a little bit more smoothly. It's also helpful because I'll talk about fidelity here in a minute, but it sort of helps people understand, like, how hard do I need to work in any one of these phases, right? It could be that someone is only being asked to do the composing, like just I do this with my partners on design teams all the time. Like, I would love for you to just write something. Just write something. Doesn't have to be good. Don't you worry about the style guideline. I'll worry about the style guidelines. But just give me a draft, and then we can take it from there. And it's going to go through these other steps in the process. So consider, even if it seems totally 101. Consider as you're training people, the lessons that you are giving them, put it inside of a framework. Don't just tell someone like here, like every thing that we write has to be focused on a key message. Tell them when the key message needs to get articulated. Hint, it's before they do the writing. Folks don't always know that. They might just go and put a draft together and look at it and go, so what is the key message now that we've spent 3 weeks writing this thing? Give them a framework to put all the other stuff that you're sharing them in context. This framework works. There's lots of other frameworks you could use. You might want to model this for your system and workflow. More detail here is just fine. Next tip. Garbage in is garbage out. I was a radio television production major, so this was the context in which I learned this idea. If you shoot video way overexposed, right, meaning you let in way too much light as you're recording it, you're sunk. There's no fixing that. That's garbage. I actually learned this phrase a little differently. But yeah, we'll go with garbage. So garbage in is garbage out. This is something to keep in mind when we are asking people to contribute writing for us. I'm very sympathetic to, and these are people I've worked with a lot, I'm very sympathetic to folks that work in like not exciting industries, as many of us might. If you're asking folks to write about life insurance products or healthcare plans or government regulations or whatever it might be, these things are sometimes like, it's not just that it's not exciting, it's the challenge is actually that it's soft, right? These very soft ideas where all the terms kind of blend together and it's just really fuzzy, like what's actually happening, what are we talking about, what is the impact and importance of this thing? What I mean by all that is to say that the clarity of the idea that you are asking people to write about and to communicate about is the #1 ingredient to the quality of the writing. So if we don't have all of our other content strategy stuff in place, and I'm not just talking style guidelines here, I'm talking like information architecture, and I'm talking about like the clarity of ideas and thinking, articulating at a business level, at an organizational level, why this stuff matters. Like that is not, it is not the writer's job to determine why a program in your organization matters. Right? That's the program manager's job or whatever that job title is. And we have to articulate those things for the people that we are asking to help us. I think it's better to do that with like some sort of consistent framework and infrastructure in place from a content strategy perspective. But this is just worth keeping in mind, especially if you're doing crits or feedback with people. If you're giving them examples, just remember that it's not all up to the writer. It's part of a system. Next tip. Tools beat rules. Or you could think of this as prefer tools to rules. Or some of my friends from Button helped me refine this in the conversation, which is, you know, if like you got to have rules, but maybe you kind of hide them in the form of tools, as if you are, you know, giving your dog his medicine inside a little peanut butter cookie. We do a lot of rule making as content people. We tell them the words they can and can't use. We put word counts in place. We do all this stuff to like control, right? It's very prescriptive. And all of those prescriptive rules in and of themselves do not help people apply those rules. Right? So even if you think of it, well, they're not really rules, it's guidance and the guidelines. Okay, great. So you've got guidelines, which means please do this, maybe as opposed to you have to do this. Look at that guideline, look at that style guide, look at all of these things that you prefer and recommend, and think about how can you help people actually apply this in their writing. So a simple example, in a lot of organizations, the frustration, the pain point that like the web and digital team has is that they've got this marketing team out there doing like just making content all day long. That's what they've been charged with, right? It's like content. So they're making all this marketing content. And the UX, the digital team is frustrated because they're like, well, what's the message here? Well, like we need to have a key message. People aren't giving us key messages, so we're having trouble writing the metadata and the title tags and doing summaries on this and so on because we're not really clear what this is about. So let's make a rule now that every piece of content has to have one key message, or audience. That's probably even more common, right? You have to articulate who your key audience is. Okay. Have you given people on your team any tools whatsoever to facilitate a conversation amongst themselves in developing a key message? Probably not. If you have, great, then this step isn't for you. But I go into teams a lot, and it's like the thing they're frustrated about, like, why don't people do this thing? I ask them, like, what training, what guidance, what tools, Mad Libs, worksheets, workshop agendas, like tools don't have to be complicated. I'm not talking technology here. Technology won't fix these problems. Intellectual tools for thinking, the tools that most average people in your organization have for writing. If you're lucky, they use outlines. That's probably it. They have outlines, writing, and rewriting. Those are the only tools available for them. So if you can give them documents that help them articulate key messages, workshop agendas are great. Content templates where you can sort of provide structure for their writing, copy decks and example content that they can borrow from. Those are things that I all think of as tools as opposed to the rules, which is what we usually do for people. So prefer tools to rules where you can. Give you a moment with this one. Jargon is jargon. The idea of jargon is jargon. We are bad as content people. I've been bad as a content person in the past about following my own advice and applying the lessons of content strategy, content design, user-centered design to my work as a content strategist. So the example here of jargon, let's say your rule is avoid jargon, right? We want to explain terminology. Okay, have you explained what jargon is? Do you think everyone in your organization has the same idea in their head right now about what jargon is? Do you think that maybe there's people in your organization who've actually never heard that word before, or maybe they never wondered what it meant? Jargon, key message, prioritized audience, content strategy, vision, mission, goal, plan, tactic, analytic, metric. Our industry is full of jargon. If you don't align on terminology, and not just align on the terminology, but like actually help people understand this stuff, you're going to have a really hard time. I encounter this very often where the content team is frustrated that people don't understand X, Y, or Z, or they're not doing it the way that they would. And I'll go in and I'll do stakeholder interviews, and I'll talk to the people that are being asked to contribute to this, and they like really don't know what this stuff is. Message is a great one. A lot of folks, and I don't say this in a critical way, just as an observation, a lot of folks think that a message, which to me is like a piece of information that we wish to convey to our audience, like the important idea we need to get across. For a lot of folks, especially with a marketing or a business background, message for them really kind of means like tagline, right? They're looking for like the "I'm loving it" that goes after McDonald's, which is, and I like from a branding perspective, I guess is a message, but it's not really relevant to like a given piece of content and a single user who needs to understand something. So just inviting you to remember that, maybe as an editing pass, right? Because there's different phases, even for putting a training workshop together. Look at what you're saying and consider which aspects of that might seem like jargon to people who are not going to spend their afternoon at a plain language summit, which I'm that person, you're that person. The people that we're trying to train are probably not those people, and we might need to explain things to them. Oh, there's one. Plain language, that's jargon. Even Einstein had to learn to tie his shoes. This is something that comes up a lot. Big challenge that I imagine for many of you is working with subject matter experts, maybe even those real bullheaded ones who you don't want to be doing the writing, but they've got more authority in some area than you do. And guess what? They're doing the writing now. So if you get a chance to work with these folks, even Einstein had to learn to tie his shoes. The way that I apply this idea in my writing training is to not assume that people know really anything at all about creating text, about documents, about editing, about anything. And for instance of that is that, like, some things that make writing really hard for people is that it can be very tedious, especially if something changes. So like you're working on some kind of semi-technical document, maybe it has to use particular language, and let's say one of the terms changes, or they get some style feedback from you that you prefer one term to another. Not everyone that you work with knows how to use find and replace. Smart people who make more money than you might not know how to use find and replace. Smart people who make more money than you might not know about converting things from Word to plain text, which can make collaboration a lot easier. They might not know that you have tools available that they might not know all kinds of things. So I tend to try and explain even stuff that seems really obvious to me, like really looking at how do I actually do the writing. One example here for me that I will share with you all, I actually don't know how I could do my daily writing work without a clipboard manager. A clipboard manager is a little application you can install on your computer that makes it so that instead of having one slot, right, having like one board that you copy something to, you can actually have a whole bunch of little slots. So that the last 10 things that you've copied are all available with a little command like, Control Shift V. The last 10, 15, 30 things that you've copied are available. Using that to put newsletters together in HTML-based documents makes my life so much easier that it's physically painful for me to watch someone like working on a document that's not using that, a clipboard manager. So I encourage people to use them. You can certainly write without it, but that's one of those examples where I like to not just talk about grammar and style, but like really look at the mechanics of writing and think like, just because it's not Figma or some other complex fancy design software doesn't mean that there aren't things that people have to learn about how to use them. So just keep that in mind. There might be more stuff that you could share. There might be more layers to your expertise and your nerdery and your geekdom that you could share with people that they might find helpful and might make writing a little more fun for them, which helps us with that whole writing is scary thing too. Tours are not the same as training. Tours are not the same as training. Boy, have I been guilty of this. I've been subject to this. Sometimes the budget is sort of the breaking point here. But tell me if this sounds familiar. Someone has been tasked with doing some writing for a web or design project that you have, and you as the content strategist or content designer or editor says, okay, great. Hey, do you mind? I'm going to throw 30 minutes on your calendar. Bring me any questions that you have. Okay, great. Hey, thanks for coming to the meeting. So we're AP style, not Chicago. Here's where you can find the voice and tone guidelines. We need to make sure that you hit at least 800 characters on this. You know what? You can actually kind of look through the guidelines yourself. So yeah, office hours are Tuesdays, 12 to 2. And let me know if you have any questions. All right, good luck. This person is just sitting there deer in the headlights. Like, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to do what now with the where? Tours are not like that kind of onboarding is great for deeply experienced writers who already know how to do this stuff. If you are roping in volunteers, interns, subject matter experts, city managers, I don't know who it is. Like if you're pulling someone in who doesn't do the kind of work that you and I do, and all you do is like throw a few rule books at them, that sucks. That's not a nice thing to do to someone. It's a scary situation. It's better to orient them than to not. But I want you to consider that training, even for people with a lot of experience, like can go a long ways. The difference between like a 90-minute like hands-on workshop where you go through some of these ideas versus like the 15-minute like lightning tour is vast difference there. So consider working in where you can, training. One of the pushback I get on training a lot is like, how do we make the time? When I was selling content strategy training for an agency, you might be surprised how much money people actually have for this stuff. They have a lot. A lot of organizations have a lot of money for training. What they don't feel like they have is a day that they can give you with the writers. So This is a good general content strategy tip, but especially if you're trying to fit writing training in. No one has a half day to give you next week, but everyone has a day to give you 6 months from now, because no one knows what they're doing 6 months from now. So look as far ahead as you need to. Start to get these things on the calendar. If you can get one thing booked, book the second thing right away. So like never do just a one-off. Like you really got to fight sometimes. But that on a long enough timeline, you can get everyone in for at least one workshop or piece of training. And you can also look at some of your standing meetings, anything that is bringing people together into a room already. Might be an opportunity to do a bit of training. You could go through over one rule at a time. You could have a newsletter where you're internal newsletter where you're orienting people to one piece of guidance at a time, but you can't just do the tour. Something to consider in helping people get better with writing is human nature. And a big part of human nature when it comes to creating documents and communicating is that stealing is very natural. I have a newsletter that I send once a week of that lists events like this. I've never gone in and hit new in the campaign tab. I go to the previous campaign and I duplicate it. If I have to write up a new contract, I find an old contract. If I have to put a new talk together, I find an old talk. It is so much easier. It's a huge time saver in the prepare step, and it's extremely natural and often good to work with something that already exists. When I think about this, is that about the idea of stealing, a lot of people have a relationship to writing that is, as I've mentioned before, that is really based in education. And what education does is tries to scare the living daylights out of people about plagiarism. It's right up there next to like, homicide apparently is plagiarism, which is very reasonable for academic works. But in business and in communications and nonprofit work, we want consistency. We want to be playing from the same deck. And often stealing is a great thing. It's a good instinct. What you need to keep in mind about that is that people are going to do it whether you create infrastructure for it or not. So if you don't have a copy deck, so like a resource, a centralized place where people can get approved copy to borrow and use in their pieces, your website is now that copy deck. They're going to grab it off the website. You know this, it happens. You've done it, probably. They're going to steal it off the website. So how confident are you in the quality of every piece of content on your website? If it's not very, that's something to think about in your trainings of pointing people towards the resources that you do wish that they would use. Another way to apply this, quick anecdote, I was working in-house once, and there's this executive sales team, like nice guys, cool guys, but like we're very different people. They're driving Lexuses. I think it's Lexi, sounds right. They're driving Lexi. They got fancy suits, and they were insistent that the only possible someone like me, this lowly content strategist, couldn't even conceive of the needs that their similar Lexi driving audience had, and they therefore had to do the writing. And I said, okay, great. Let me put a content table together for you that just outlines all the stuff that you are going to need to write for me. And do you know what I put into that content table? So much, for example, text. I filled it up with for example this and for example that. And you know what came back in the final copy? Was text that I had written about 80% of. Stealing is natural. It was right there. They stole it. Everyone was happy. They felt like they wrote it. I got my writing and some of my content recommendations into the piece. So keep this in mind. Think about what can you do to make it a good thing that people are reusing the right kinds of content and phrases and so on in your organization. Fidelity. I don't know how many folks are on design teams here. If we got some UX writers, content design type folks. One of the things that you observe if you work with a design team in the trenches is that it's very normal in a UX design process, in a visual based design process to go through different levels of fidelity. Fidelity is like how done it looks and feels. So if you're sketching on a whiteboard with markers, that's very low fidelity. If you are using Sharpies on a piece of paper, that's very low fidelity. If you are using Keynote to drag some boxes around and make a quick wireframe, that's higher fidelity. And now you're in Photoshop and you're making it look pixel perfect, that's very high fidelity. So now let's think about content. Looking at a paragraph of text, it is not always immediately apparent how high or low fidelity it is, right? Whether someone has worked on this for 100 hours or 10 minutes is not going to be apparent to the eyes. It might be apparent once you read it that someone hasn't worked very hard on it. But what I want you to keep in mind around this idea is that in teaching people whatever your process is, right, the prepare, compose, edit, finish, whatever the steps in the workflow are, let them know about drafts. Introduce the idea of drafts and fidelity and versioning. I got this from Biz Sanford. She's a content strategist with Shopify. In one of her talks at Confab, I think, talked about protocopy. Which is sort of like we're like a prototype for a design. We're roughing in the text, like we're putting in an approximation of what we want as opposed to filler text like lorem ipsum. So if you make it more natural, more acceptable part of the company culture, organizational culture, for people to create low fidelity text with the confidence that it's going to go through a process, I think that's can be really liberating for people, because sometimes the friction is that they're trying to write pitch perfect, word perfect text right from the beginning. It's a really hard thing to do. If you let people know it's okay to write rough drafts, to just jot down some thoughts, to make it comfortable, that's a great thing. You can do this with color the way that designers do. You could set it in Comic Sans to hopefully indicate that that's not ready for production. I make mine hot pink because I've never, except for my own website, I've never worked on a brand where hot pink was one of the colors in use. And so all of the words that are hot pink, then you know that it's not quite done yet. So fidelity. Top question, one of the top questions you are going to get if you are doing a training or you're going to get from someone who's hiring you to do the training is that people are having conversations about what is good writing, what is good copy, how do we determine what good copy is. So I have two thoughts on this. One, you need to determine that with your team. The best way to determine what good writing is through conversation with your team, agreeing on what good writing is. It's not what the other guys are doing. It's not what Scott says. It's what you all agree. Absent that, I tend to land on the side of this philosophy, which is that good writing works. If it works for the business, if it works for the user, if everybody looking at it can understand what's happening here, it's good writing. It's done. Move on. Almost none of us are working on things that are prose. Like I'll say it. I think that too many folks who are holding the reins to style and writing and prose in a company can be jerks. I think we can be a little too pedantic. I think that we can be a little grammar snobby. And knowing that something could be better doesn't mean that what's there right now is broken or bad. So I would encourage you to consider talking about quality as part of your conversations. I think there's one of these in Content Strategy Toolkit, but like having a content quality checklist, having scorecards to evaluate it. Those things can help you put some numbers to it. But absent other guidance, I think it's helpful and liberating to people if you encourage and train them on the idea that the good writing is the writing that works, and that's what they should focus on, not on grammar perfection, but just making it happen. Okay. Another one, I think we're coming up on the end of the list here. Critiques. I am so happy that through the content design methodology it seems to me that critiques are becoming more popular with content and writers, not just with designers. If you have not participated in one, critiques are different than the feedback. Like like criticism or notes on your draft is not the same as a critique. So a critique is a session where hopefully at least a few voices from a few different perspectives come into a room. The person who produced the piece talks about what their goals for the piece were, and then everyone asks questions about it, offers suggestions for possible improvement, and you really like workshop it together. When I was in theater, we would just call this notes after every rehearsal. The proper way to respond to a note is thank you, and then you write that note down. You're not necessarily debating or making decisions during a critique, but you are just using a bit of collective brain power to try and optimize what's there, maybe poke some holes in it, and so on. The reason that these critiques are critical is this is one of, like, you need to do this anyway. Like, someone needs to be looking at what got written, doing what we can to improve it. Those critiques have massive training and educational value. So if you can find time on your calendars periodically to do some critiques, I think that's great. The team I'm contracting with right now, 1 hour a week, there's a content crit. Anyone can sign up. The writer / designer talks through what they did. We all make notes in an app, and they say thank you, and then they can go back and chew through those notes. You'll learn so fast from participating in a critique. If all you do is ask people to write things and then they send it to you and then they never get any feedback on it, they're not going to learn very much. So critiques are critical. Mindset thing. I say this because this is a trap I fall into sometimes, and I'm trying to be mindful of it. It can feel, when you are the content strategist, when you have been charged with making the writing good and making the content good, it can start to feel like everyone is out to get you and that people are trying to subvert you. And those darn stakeholders, they're such jerks. If only they cared about the user the way that I care about the user. I get it. I understand that feeling. Let's investigate that feeling. Y'all work at the same place. You got the same name badge. Ostensibly, if you haven't been driven away yet, like you have some sort of shared goals, people want to help. They want to do the best that they can. They might have different ideas about what good content is. They might have different ideas about when we should talk about content in the design process. They don't have those different ideas because they're out to get you. They don't have those different ideas because they are trying to subvert the quality of content on your website. They just haven't gotten the training that helps them see a better path. So I just encourage you to chew on this a little bit. Think about how you communicate out, even amongst your peers. If you it's something to listen for. If you and the other content folks find yourselves talking a lot about how, dumb or misguided or what bad writers, people in X, Y, or Z department are, folks are going to feel that, even if you're not saying it to their face. So keep in mind that, like, people want to help. If you can find a way to make the things that you want clear to them, they're going to be happy to do it. In my experience, sometimes teams have been pulling their hair out for a year because people, for instance, won't slow down to articulate who the primary audience for a piece of content is. And a lot of times the reason that they don't ever slow down and do that is because they don't know how. No one ever gave them a tool for doing it. So please remember, people do want to help. All right. I could probably go on for 12 more. I'm seeing some questions coming in through the chat. These are my 12 tips. I'd love to hear what yours are. Again, remember, don't try and apply all of these at once. But this is sort of like, I'm hoping that this was helpful for you to sort of interrogate your own plan for approaching training and onboarding writers in your organization. I may be giving you some new lenses to look at. I'm Scott. I'm looking forward to chatting. My website is Kubie, kubie.co. Please feel free to reach out to me about literally anything. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to connect and engage with folks. My book talks about some of this, especially that prepare, compose, edit, finish framework. If you want more depth on that, you might enjoy writing for designers. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Fantastic. This is Katherine. Scott, you've given us so much to think about, and I don't know if you are going to pride yourself on this or not, but you've had the most questions of any of our presenters. So
I
I'd
hope that
like
is coming
to.
from curiosity and not because I was so obtuse.
No, 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 no. A
All
lot
right.
of people are, very excited about using someone has to do the writing, which, and somebody says hi across the river in St. Paul. So you
Oh,
have
wonderful. All right.
some neighborhood fans. So as I've been collecting the questions, I'm going to start with, do you have a good book or digital resource about the finish part in your four-step process in regards to workflows and their composition? And I'm assuming it's a question about a book that's not your book. Does your book
Yeah.
discuss?
It does a bit. I think the unsatisfying answer to that question is that is the phase that varies the most,
Mm,
not just from organization to organization, but even like project to project. I think the workflow planning in general is pretty well covered. Like I think you'll find more talk about workflow planning, I would say, in content strategy flavored things. There's a bit of it in content strategy for the web. There's a bit of it in content strategy toolkit. I saw on Twitter earlier, it sounds like Managing Chaos already came up. Lisa Welchman's book
mm-hmm.
gets into governance quite a bit. So yeah, I think, like how you manage that finishing phase, like whether you're waterfall or agile, like that's two totally different conversations.
Right.
The takeaway I want folks to have from this is like you got to talk about it. So as long as like if you're doing that, if you're having some conversation about what happens after the draft is done, you're ahead of most organizations.
Well, where we all wish to be. Um, Sometimes it's hard to discern the difference between industry-specific terms and jargon.
Mhm.
Where can we simplify and where is it important to use a specific term?
Yeah. So this is tough to build in the process, but I do believe that this is an important place for testing. If you Google content testing, you find a lot of stuff from marketing ding dongs about A/B testing, and that's not really like that's fine, but
Mm-hmm.
that's really for like optimizing. But there's a lot of stuff from information architecture schools of thought, content strategy schools of thought, user research of just like kind of checking like whether people comprehend something or not. I'm sure closed testing has come up. I know that's big in plain language circles, but you might just have to look at a given word and figure it out for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Now the good news is if you can get a sense of who your users are and you can do that testing once, that is going to be relatively universally applicable guidance, like as long as it's that same audience. So do people understand this term or not? And you might have to do that on a case by case basis. Good news is there's only going to be so many words in your world, and it never hurts to explain them. But you might get away with more than you think if you do some testing.
Mm-hmm. I had another question on the finish part,
Mm-hmm.
and you've already answered that, but the person asking the question said, I only found a chapter in the Anne Rockley book, the Enterprise Content Strategy one, about that so far. So just
Okay.
adding to the conversation. Now, a thing that comes up very frequently in plain language circles, as you say, you may be touching on this later, but what grade level are we writing to these days if it's for a public facing website? Is it still 6th grade? And I'm curious to know your take on readability levels.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to the first part of it. Reading level, especially looking at it from a grade level perspective, to be honest, doesn't factor into my work a lot. I have been lucky enough to primarily if I'm doing the writing, I primarily am doing that as part of a design team, and we have a user research or sometimes usability testing process. And in the spirit of like good writing works, I think if you've got a readability test and it says that this thing is 10th grade and this thing is 6th grade and this thing is 4th grade and this thing is PhD level, but everyone that you test it with is making sense of the content and able to complete their tasks, who cares? It works. The content works. Good writing is the writing that works. Some interesting applications I've seen, and probably half the people listening have more insight on this than I do. But I do think the grade level can be really nice as like more of like a global metric, you know, so like we audited 300 pages of content and the average was an 11th grade level, and then we applied we had a training and refreshed those 300 pages, and now it's the average is, you know, ninth grade. That to me seems like we're moving in a good direction. On a piece of content by piece of content level, boy, I come in with a whole lot of skepticism about that kind of stuff.
Great. Another scenario, you transform an ancient site's language to be plain and you apply agency style and you send it to the content owners and they proceed to undo much of your work and to re-violate the agency style guide. What is your suggestion for heading off this undoing?
Yeah. Well, the right answer is hinted at in that question, which is you definitely don't fix that after the fact. You take your lumps and learn your lesson. So yeah, I think that it is it's about designing a process where feedback does not come in the form of someone writing whatever the heck they want all over your draft. Like if you have to hand someone the red pen, and a lot of times we do that unintentionally because we didn't think about like presenting our work. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but Donna Spencer is fantastic. Has a new book out, From a Book Apart, on presenting design work. Mike Montero has some writing on this. A lot of other folks talk in this area. The writing work that you did is a piece of design. You need to think about presenting your design work, making arguments and cases for the choices that you made to demonstrate that the words are not arbitrary. If the words are arbitrary, then tough luck. You didn't have a very good process, and someone else probably is going to come in and stomp all over it. If you can articulate why you made the choices that you did and base them on assumptions and research and so on, and demonstrate that connectedness, it's a lot harder for people to do that kind of thing. This is where critiques can help if the way that they are reviewing it is through a presentation and critique versus you just firing a draft over email. I guess the short answer is it's tactical, but you do need to often use a combination of 2 or 3 tactics to mitigate against that.
Great, that's very useful because I've been wondering about what is the tipping point of plain language, because I'll have a document shared with me and I'll go in and make my plain language reviews and edit suggested edits, and then 2 weeks later they'll go through and ask me questions, and part of it I don't remember at that point. I have moved on in the vernacular, and I'm wondering the best way of maybe summarizing my changes by saying your paragraphs are very long, see this page, or your sentences are also very long, or you're using your industry specific words inconsistently here. And then in the next time they invite me to review something, to say, have you checked for these things before I even get it? So that's a little bit about what I'm thinking here. Easy question for you, I hope. What is a content table?
Yeah, there are a few you'll find different terms of art in use. You might hear them referred to as page tables, content tables, content requirements, documents. That is the content table is the way that I tend to refer to the document that's it's at the level of a single piece of content, so like a page or like maybe a flow in an app or something. And it lays out what is required to create the content. So as opposed to just saying, we need 800 words from you, you like have a thing that specifies, here's like, we need a title, we need a subhead, we need a description, we need this and that. And those requirements gathering documents, it specifies the content that you need, yes, but that is like one of the best places, whether you do this with Word docs or in your CMS or whatever, or gather content, something like that. You can put all kinds of guidance and secretly bake in rules in that content table, because you can have like a required field that is primary audience. Well, that's not part of the content, but you're requiring people to articulate that. with the content they're submitting. So yeah, content tables, page tables. There's probably other terms of art out there. I apologize for not explaining that one earlier. But yeah, you'll find some variations out there.
Great. We have that in our content management platform. So
wonderful.
that's,
yeah.
Do you have an opinion or advice on having a glossary section for a website? And is there a name or phrase that's more accessible than glossary? And they provided a URL, which is the tate.org.uk/art/art terms. So, you know, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I think this is going to, it varies wildly based on the type of organization. I mean, as a language-minded person, like, I mean, my general thought is like, I wish there were more glossaries everywhere. I wish that restaurant menus came with glossaries, because I don't know what half that stuff is sometimes. So yeah, I'm all for explaining terminology. This is, I haven't done any personal research on this, but the patterns that are more appealing to me is when it's not just a single document, but it's really more of a database, and terms can be linked to, especially like in a knowledge base, or if you have technical authors, you might very well need to have something that feels like a glossary that explains those terms. For something like a museum, or something where you are maybe explaining a specialized field to a generalized audience, I think that is almost something to consider more as like an editorial theme, right? Like we're gonna have a series of posts or articles or short videos, or that's what we do on social media. It's art term of the week or whatever. But yeah, so you got to find the pattern that works. But yeah, more the merrier. If you can train people over time to get more comfortable with the words, it makes your job a lot easier.
Great. 2 questions about jargon, just what you were hoping for, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What if jargon has SEO value, and that's search optimization, search engine optimization?
Yeah, I have strong feelings about this. Part of it is like things are changing rapidly, and particular phrases being of value to search engines is becoming less important than the overall content being valuable to users. And Google is getting a lot better at determining that, of just how long people are on the page and that sort of thing. So that's something to look at. I think if you are trying to be competitive for a particular phrase, and that is not a plain language phrase, that's a strategy level conversation. Like, why do we care about this term? Is it because it's just an like SEO value does not mean like SEO need. The fact that we could capture more organic search traffic on this term. Why are we trying to capture more organic search traffic on this term? If you can articulate a good business case for that, then it's just methodical, tedious content planning. Like, all right, what is our footprint of content that will rank for this term and also meet these other requirements that we have? There's no magic bullet. It's not like one or the other. Oh, well, actually, we can use the phrase because it has SEO value, or no, you never get to use the phrase because it's not plain language. Like, that's what the work is. That's what the work is.
And similarly, what are good ways to help an audience get smarter in a topic that does benefit from jargon, and where they might want to broaden their knowledge? I have a hard time thinking about this in the civic content area, but
yeah, I mean, from a writerly perspective, I guess I am of the school of thought. So like my lens on the world is not plain language. Like my lens tends to be more, I think, user-centered design and like making the thing work. So with that in mind, like I think that for me, plain language is a tool in my belt where, like doing an editing pass on something to use less complex language makes my content more usable, which means greater user success. So if there is, I would never shy away from not even talking about things that require more complex terminology. I think a lot of these do just come down to editorial planning questions. I think a lot of my experience is a lot of organizations get stuck because they what they actually need and don't have is a content model. There's some jargon for you. So a content model is the intellectual, the conceptual design of the system of content on your site, the types of content, right? It's like where we're distinguishing press releases from news articles, from blog posts, from guides. So often if there's like a thing we're trying to do, but we can't figure out how to do it with content, it's often because there's a content type missing from your content model. Like we'd like to be able to do X, but we can't within these constraints. Okay, like create a new set of constraints. Finds you like that is a design challenge. How do we make a piece of content that introduces this terminology, is structured in a way that we can do an explainer at the top for what this complex term is, and guide people through it. None of this is binary. It's never binary. It's never we can or can't use the word.
Well, one last question for you, and then you can go back to your coffee or your guitar.
Yeah, all right.
Do you have any advice for coaching people who think their writing is clear, but it's actually not?
Yeah. So critiques are helpful if you can get them to sit in on a usability test where they have to watch people have trouble understanding their terminology. Boy, that's painful and works. So that is a great option. I think another, if someone has, I mean, this is just kind of in general with coworkers. I mean, I don't even know if this is specific to writing, but it's a lot more effective as a teaching methodology if you can ask probing questions that help people articulate for themselves why something isn't working. So if what like the wrong approach is tell them this is going to be hard for people to understand because XYZ, rule, guideline, principle of content strategy, whatever. If you can create a framework for reviewing, critiquing, workshopping that content where you can say, imagine that you were this kind of person with this kind of need. What would you do? What would you look for? What would you gravitate for? So on and so forth. So sometimes those kinds like creating a structured conversation can help. That's why I really like creating content quality checklists so we can sort of like go through it together of like, does this content help someone X? I've put plain language on content quality checklists before. Does this content make appropriate use of plain language and communicate in the simplest terms possible? Then you ask them that. Does it? They say yes. You say, can you help me understand how that's the case? Now they have to articulate it, and they're probably not going to be able to because it doesn't. So it's a lot of like. A lot of times in content strategy consulting, editorial work with other people, I know what the right answer is, and me saying the right answer doesn't help. You have to walk people through the thought process so that they see it for themselves.
Thank you so much. Any final words for us before
just thank you to everyone for jumping in. I'm excited to dig back through the chat. I'm sure there were many questions here that we didn't have a chance to talk through. I try and blog as regularly as I can. So if you have a question you'd love for me to answer, please send it to me through any channel you can find me on, other than my home phone number. That would be kind of weird. But any other channel, feel free to send me a question, and yeah, maybe it'll turn into a video or a post online, or sometimes you get 10 minutes in between meetings, and I'm exactly in the mood to answer a stranger's question. So happy to help.
Well, you do have a question of what's your blog. So
yeah,
is it on?
Yeah, but just that main website. So kubie.co. I got FAQs. Oh boy, don't even start it on that. I believe in FAQs. I think they're great. So I have an FAQ on content and UX, and post and other stuff that the people can dig into there.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, FAQs. We could have an entire summit on FAQs. But
I thought I'd throw some chum in the water before I bounced off here. So.
Then we all get irate and take over the chat. Yes, that's exactly what we're planning on. Well, I have, let's see, I'm seeking yet more caffeine. But thank you so much. I feel, as I said before, exactly as I did in Confab, where I needed my extra brain. And luckily there's one just down the hall from me. So, extra brain is going to be fine. I have been struck by not only our presenters, who were uniformly excellent and brought such thrilling perspectives and, just, sharp ways of approaching content and our audiences in the federal space, but also being really impressed by the questions that people asked. So I've really, appreciated people's flexibility and ability to answer questions coming from, everywhere via the chat. And in fact, I have one comment that someone made in the chat, which is, I love how Scott's garbage in, garbage out and calls for useful functional content echo the perspectives of auditing from Nicole yesterday and Jenny and Abby today. So we have a good conference story arc. And I know that that is always something that I aim for that. So wrapping up, I think this was superb. I think that we conquered all of the little technology bits, and maybe we have to do this next year, maybe not, but this was particularly useful, and I think opened up the plain language world. I know that sometimes I come to plain language strictly as an editor or a reviewer, and sometimes I'm coming from it, for web content, and it is a wholesome reminder to me that there's a whole lot of other things going on with plain language. And something that I believe we may not have called out specifically, we didn't necessarily call it by this overall, but I think that we stressed how plain language and our content explorations, as it were, really stressed accessibility and access and inclusion for everybody, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's our audience, whether it's, anyone in our space. And I'm including that generously because while most of plainlanguage.gov's focus, most of our focus is on the federal government, we also include state and local and tribal and city. Anyone who wants to learn more about plain language is welcome. They'll just have to put up with a lot of federal talk for all of that. And, as I've been looking at all of this, I remember what I've always thought is there's a lot of roles you can play in plain language. There's you don't have to become a trainer. If you don't want to stand up in front of people and train, you don't have to. You can be a reviewer. You can be the person on your team who says, if anyone wants to run anything by me, I'm happy to look at material. That's really useful because people get very busy and they forget. And, I think anything benefits from review. And, maybe your particular skill is, hint, hint, adapting plain language for online virtual training, which is something that the plain language trainers are working on right now. We've all had to, oh, I hate the word, but pivot and learn a new skill that, we may not necessarily be, we're all beginners at something, and sometimes that's ours. So I feel that I am beginning to maunder, so I'm going to bring this to a close with hearty thanks to Digitalgov for hosting, for Gabby and Alex for all their hard work that went into putting this on, with all the work that went into that before we even started it yesterday morning. And also all of our speakers who, when I emailed them randomly pretty much and said, would you be interested in speaking? Mostly said, sure. When? What topic? And I appreciate their enthusiasm. I appreciate their willingness to deal with all of our government processes, which we're all changing because of having to move virtually and things like this. So yes, if you have ideas, please send them to us at info@plainlanguage.gov. Final wrap up, as I've said, we will be posting the video on digital.gov. We will be sending out the materials to the community of practice, so join on plainlanguage.gov and let us know two things. If you have, well, at least two things, there can be more. Let us know if you have an idea for other speakers. Let us know if you want to hold a workshop with us. We will figure out how to do it virtually. I'm saying that with a great deal of confidence that I'm sure is justified. Let us know if you have other ideas, because this is people I've met, people I've listened to and thought, wow, other people could know this. Other people could really benefit from this. And not everyone's able to go to conferences. So, in a way, I think virtual. So before I burble myself into incoherence, I'm going to stop well short of that and say thank you to everyone